Hello, welcome, and thanks for tuning in. I'm Lindsey DePeri-Franz, archetypal evolutionary astrologer, and this is my astrological flowcast for the week of May 23rd to the 29th. This week, we have the super full moon lunar eclipse in Sagittarius. We also have an activation of the lunar nodes, a challenging square aspect to Jupiter in Pisces, and Saturn and Mercury going retrograde. As one of the main energetic high points of the year, this week is going to feel intense. It can show up as pressure, frustration, or drama in relationships. Eclipses intensify the energy of all other astrological influences currently in play. And this is why this time is so intense. It's also why this time generates so many significant milestones in people's lives. So we have the full moon lunar eclipse happening on Wednesday morning, and also a solar eclipse new moon coming up in June. The eclipses influence us for several weeks, so the eclipse season actually extends from April to July, with the peak happening this week. Eclipses are very intense and dramatic times. It can feel like you're having an existential crisis where nothing is going right. This can be a very powerful time for conflict, confusion, and also turning points. There can be this mix now of endings and new beginnings, grief and optimism, uncertainty, excitement, and defining moments. There's also a calling to pursue new paths related to your life's purpose. In addition, relationships may evolve in some way to a new level. There may be new relationships beginning in your life, or existing relationships reaching a new level of maturity, or perhaps ending. The lunar eclipse this week is bringing closure to an energetic arc that began in the fall of last year, around the November-December timeframe. So you can also look back to that time and what was happening in your life, what was perhaps being initiated, or where a focus was being brought, because that is what's going to be reaching its maturity in some way or reaching a natural conclusion. Also, a new energetic arc is also being initiated by the new moon eclipse that's coming up on June the 10th, which I'll be exploring in more detail in the coming weeks. Now, let's look at the sign energy being activated by the full moon eclipse. This eclipse happens in Sagittarius, the free spirit of the zodiac. Sagittarius is a fiery sign with a warrior's heart, a scholar's mind, and a philosopher's soul. A key theme of this lunar eclipse is radical honesty with yourself. This is a time for seeing yourself more clearly or more objectively, being honest about how you're showing up in the world, and having the courage to confront yourself in this way. Another key guidance is letting go of what doesn't fit. And this is important to remember as we move into the second half of this lunar cycle over the next 2 weeks. We also have Saturn going retrograde in the sign of Aquarius. This signals the dismantling of self-limiting beliefs, as well as the activation of the sacred rebel archetype. The sacred rebel is a radical idealist who questions the status quo and brings about necessary change. So, this idea of idealism, tuning into your principles and values, speaking truth, radical honesty, and also this energy has to do with lifting a veil of illusion that in some way has been distorting your view of the world, your relationships, and or yourself. How this is showing up for you personally is going to depend on where both Saturn and the lunar nodes are activating in your natal chart. This is very much a time, this full moon eclipse in Sagittarius is really calling for us to examine our attitudes and biases, where there may be blind spots or where we may need to become more open-minded. Coming back to Saturn in Aquarius from 2020 to 2023 and that activation of the sacred rebel, this energy is also, among other things, calling for us to tackle the world's problems in radical new ways. And this idea of bringing new ways of thinking, new perspectives, new approaches to be able to creatively address and solve long-standing problems, complicated problems. This is very much the energy of Aquarius showing up here. Now, on a more personal level, this energy represents developing a newfound sense of confidence and self-acceptance, as well as the courage to stand up for your principles and values, even if it means standing apart from the crowd or taking an unpopular point of view. Again, that energy of the sacred rebel. Aquarius energy questions the status quo. And so, a key question to ask yourself is, where do I need to bring greater discernment? Where do I need to take a step back and question my assumptions? Where am I not seeing the full picture? Where do I need to have greater clarity about a situation or a circumstance that I'm facing? There is a calling to put emotions into perspective and take a sort of bird's eye view, if you will. Again, opening ourselves to our blind spots, to illuminating our blind spots. Another theme for this lunar eclipse full moon is the need for conscious balancing. We're going to need to work with the energies of Gemini and Sagittarius consciously this week. These are being activated by the full moon and also by the lunar nodes. So we need to find a way to make these energies cooperate or work together. Otherwise, we risk getting lost in an extreme expression of either sign. The activation of the lunar nodes is key because these serve as guideposts on your personal evolutionary journey and also on our collective journey. They describe how you're being called to evolve your approach and mindset in some way. And they're going to bring frustration as a way of showing you where you need to adapt. The North Node identifies the expressions that you're being called to explore or lean into, or perhaps rediscover. And when we do this, we experience greater harmony, truth, fulfillment, or the illumination of gifts, also luckiness, and serendipity. So the North Node is in Gemini, and this is where we have some complication of the full moon energies, because typically during a full moon, we're more heavily influenced by the moon energy. Full moon pulls on our emotions and it influences us in unconscious ways. So we need to be mindful of how this full moon is activating the South Node, which is in Sagittarius. This can mean that you're being shown where you need to make adjustments to your point of view, especially around your approach to making judgments or your approach to conflict or your response to being triggered when your defenses are triggered or your pride or your ego. At the same time, there is the potential to express super high vibration expressions of Sagittarius energy. And this can bring experiences of new adventure, some kind of academic success, higher learning, exploring new wisdom, exploring old world wisdom, culture and history, mentorship, travel, or spiritual awakening. So I don't want to ignore that, but I also want to draw attention to the South Node activation with this full moon and how that is really bringing very, very strong potential for extreme or shadow expressions of Sagittarius to come forward with a calling for conscious evolution or reframing. Sagittarius is a fire sign, and in its most extreme expressions, you may feel or observe in others anger, brooding, being hung up on the past, needing to prove yourself, needing to be right, or needing to be the boss and be in charge. The South Node has a seductive pull. It can blind your objectivity in certain situations. It is also pointing out where we can or where we're being called to elevate our expressions of what Sag energy rules in the psyche. So collectively, the South Node in Sagittarius is highlighting excessive or outdated norms, trends, cultural behaviors, or cultural um, elements that may be harmful or that may be again outdated or leading us astray, that are leading us away from truth. Sagittarius and Gemini represent two very different approaches to arriving at the truth. And with the North Node in Gemini, the calling is to be curious, a very Gemini word, but to be curious about that Gemini approach. This is not meant to imply that any sign in the zodiac is good or better than any other sign, or that any sign is bad. This is the alignment, this is the activation that the lunar nodes are bringing. And the calling now is to examine Sagittarius energy because of that South Node activation. So we need to balance consciously. We need to step outside of the drama of the moment in order to take the seat of the witness, be honest, and be humble. Watch out for oversimplification and how this contributes to your perception of threats or enemies. Here are some questions to consider. How are your biases and assumptions showing up in your way of understanding the world? Are you brooding on the past or holding a grudge? Are you afraid to stray away from your comfort zone? Are you being insensitive in some way to another person? Do you need to apologize? Do you need to have greater compassion and empathy in order to see that person in their totality as fully three-dimensional? Finally, how can you keep the lines of communication open? Sagittarius, as a fire sign, can really get into that trigger point of fight or flight. And where we're being called to lean in is to not escalate a confrontation or a disagreement, to keep talking, and especially to listen and keep asking questions. Gemini energy, in its highest vibration expressions, brings a focus to the present moment, a sense of accepting others without judgment, a sense of flexibility, lightheartedness, playfulness, curiosity, and again, willingness to listen and compromise. So also we have Jupiter in Pisces, and this is in a hard aspect to the super full moon, which means we cannot ignore this influence. It's going to be a source of frustration. Pisces rules the unconscious psyche, and so this energy is representing something that needs to be released or seen more clearly, that may be hidden or that may be somehow suppressed or denied, especially emotions or intuitive guidance. You may need to feel and name some truth that up until this point there has been an avoidance of. With this challenging aspect now in play, you may be dealing with complex emotions, extreme highs and lows. There is so much tension right now around the polarity between despair and faith. And when we look at the calling of Jupiter and Pisces on us to release, where we need to release perhaps some of the shadow expressions of Pisces is going to be a sense of helplessness, a sense of disempowerment, or a sense of despair. Fear of the unknown, fear of change, guilt, regret, shame, wanting to escape the feeling realm, wanting to drown it all out and perhaps even lose yourself. So notice how you have been coping with stress, because there's also a powerful opportunity now to release unhealthy habits or unhealthy ways of being in relationships. This activation is really bringing awareness to your relationship with spirit, with us, with what brings your sense of hope and optimism and trust. How can you surrender to the flow of life and find a sense of empowerment for yourself? So, reframing your circumstances. Again, you may need to step outside, take that seat of the witness, and recognize where there may be a blind spot in how you're understanding your circumstances, or perhaps even what options are available to you. So the release point is very much around letting go of attachment to outcome, surrendering to the unknown, as well as a sense of faith. You may need to let go of an idea that you're holding onto of yourself in order to create space for greater authenticity. We also have access to powerful release through forgiveness now. So, finding a new way to let go of the past, letting go of judgment. And this can also be very empowering for us. Last year marked a crossing over the threshold of a new age, but we're still in the process of understanding what that really entails. Astrological progressions tell us that more and more as we move forward, the old rules will no longer apply. And this is also showing up in the messages of the lunar node activations. We must prepare ourselves to face radical change in this new chapter. All this year, and with this eclipse in particular, we're dealing with tense aspects involving Uranus and Taurus. Again, that archetype ruler of Aquarius energy, the energy of the rebel, of radical change, of reform, of challenging the status quo and breaking with tradition, tackling the world's problems in new ways. So, this represents an increasing pressure and growing call to respond to the threats of climate change, to address unfair power dynamics in our society, to understand and respond to shifts in global political dynamics. Again, understanding that we are really coming into a new paradigm and the old ways or the old rules may no longer apply. We also need to deal with new problems being introduced by rapidly evolving technology, especially around data security, data privacy, hacking, and so forth. Ultimately, we need to develop new skills and embrace new perspectives in order to face today's problems. A big part of this, and coming back to that influence of Saturn in retrograde now in Aquarius, is embodying our values, taking action in alignment with our core principles, and recognizing the influences of our actions in society and in relation to Mother Earth. Taking a step back, one of the key themes for this year overall is learning to develop greater resilience and flexibility in the face of change, a sense of internal stability, not being rattled to the core in the face of uncertainty or in the face of loss. The ability to stay agile, to pivot and adjust when the unexpected arises, to stay focused on the present with a view to the future instead of dwelling on the past, and to see new opportunities in the context of a shifting landscape. As I said earlier, this eclipse season is very much about evolving our attitude and mindset, with Gemini and Sagittarius really being dominant now, dominantly activated now, and calling for us to have greater awareness to how we perceive the world, and how we arrive at our perception of truth. There is a calling to set the mind free by shifting how we respond, by interrupting the urge to be defensive or to need to be right or to need to prove ourselves, and setting the mind free and allowing the mind to be creative in coming up with new solutions. Here are some final questions for reflection. What is really important to me, and how do I embody that in my actions? What is my touchstone for courageous love and courageous action? Who are my heroes? What needs to change now in my world, and how can I accept that more readily? What are my blind spots? What is my true lived experience? How can I recognize the wisdom, priorities, fears, or needs of others by honoring their lived experience? Can I ask more questions and listen more without judgment? A key guidance for navigating this full moon eclipse is to question what you think you know and be curious about what's new, uncertain, mysterious or unseen, and unknown. We begin this week with the moon in Libra and then moving into Scorpio. And this is where the energies of the eclipse are really going to get quite intense. Monday and Tuesday, with the nearly full moon in Scorpio, the shadow expressions that come up can include cynicism, pessimism, fear, anger, frustration in relationships, perhaps unclear or unfair expectations coming to the surface. Wednesday morning is the full moon lunar eclipse. It will happen early in the morning between 4:15 and 7:15 a.m. in the continental US. So unless you are somewhere where the eclipse happens before sunrise, so further west you are, the better chance you have. Otherwise, you will not be able to see the blood red of the eclipse. But this is also a super full moon, so it will be huge right at moonrise around the time of sunset from Monday to Saturday this week. This is definitely an intense time, and with all full moons, it helps to be patient and compassionate with yourself and with others. Tune in and be curious about what's coming up as a way of gaining greater insights, valuable self-awareness, and self-mastery. Finally, Mercury stations retrograde on Saturday in the late afternoon. In general, this is a signal to slow down and bring more focus to self-care, also to have patience, and to let go of attachment to outcome or forcing certain actions. Energy may be lowered. You may need to spend more time rejuvenating and replenishing your store. I will be focusing a little bit more on tips and guidance for navigating Mercury retrograde next week. But for now, I hope you found this helpful. If you're interested in working together one-on-one, please visit allriseastrology.com or send me an email to book a private session. You can also check out my blog again at allriseastrology.com, see what's new there. I have recently posted an article with some insights about Jupiter in Pisces. I also have a few workshops coming up next month to explore the astrology of the solar eclipse new moon with guided meditation. And if you are able to attend live in Lafayette, Colorado, just outside Boulder, there's going to be sound journey with a sublime cosmic gong bath as well. If you are interested in attending those events, please sign up for my newsletter so that you can receive details about registration. The link is in the description. This Flowcast is available weekly on both YouTube and Spotify. If you haven't already, please subscribe to this channel so we can stay connected. Thank you and have a great week.